All right, hello everyone. Welcome to What's New in Historical Fiction, a regular panel series featuring historical novelists with new and upcoming titles. My name is Colin Mustful. I'm the founder and editor of History Through Fiction and the host of our panel. I'm really glad that you could join us here on this sunny Sunday afternoon. Hopefully, it's sunny where you are. Um, we have a really great panel with some really amazing novels. It's going to go quickly because we have some really fun history to dive into, some really awesome storytelling. So I'm just glad that you could be here for this. Um, if you would like, please say hello in the chat. I've enabled your cameras so you can have your cameras on or off. I have not enabled the mics just to make sure there are no distractions. But go ahead and say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Maybe let us know if you've picked up any of these books yet or are in the middle of them, anything like that. I also have a landing page with all of our panelists' novels. So if you're not familiar with each one of the novels that we're talking about, I just posted in the chat that landing page. You can go there, find out, read the synopsis for each one of these novels. It also includes links to bookshop.org. If you wanted to purchase the novel, we support bookshop.org because they give a percentage of the sales back to independent booksellers. And we always want to be supporting our indie bookstores. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to remove myself from the screen. You'll still be able to hear me, but I'll keep the screen for just our panelists here. All right, let's say hello to Susan Wiggs, author of Wayward Girls.
Hi there. I was just thinking what a gift it was to be on this panel because I've already read Kelli's book and Kristina's book, and Hazel's is next up. So I've been very entertained just even prepping for this discussion today. So thank you. My book is Wayward Girls. It's actually not out yet, but you can pre-order it. It comes out July 15th, and it's funny. I don't think of it as a historical novel, but it starts in 1968 and spans a time period of 50 years. So I suppose in that regard it is. It's about a very little known harsh reform school for girls in Buffalo called the Good Shepherd Institute, and it was actually a operated as a Magdalene Laundry where they sent girls who were had unplanned pregnancies or had failed out of the foster care system or had other issues going on, and it was a residential place where they performed slave labor. And so it was kind of a surprising and painful research journey, but it turned into a book that I can't wait for people to read because it had me on the edge of my seat as I was writing it. So hopefully it will be the same for readers.
Thank you, Susan. All right, next let's say hello to Kelli Estes, author of, now I have to look at it, The Smoke on the Wind.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Colin, for having me here today. This is a great group of authors. I love all of your books, so this is a treat. As Colin said, my name is Kelli Estes. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and my book is Smoke on the Wind. It is dual timeline, which means it's both historical and present day, goes back and forth between the two. The historical is set in 1801 Scotland, which is a place of my heart. So, as you can see with my Scottish coup here. um, so, Smoke on the Wind is about two women walking the same path in different times, both of them carrying the extra weight of past trauma and fear of their future. In the historical, well, I'll just say one of them is um, evading dealing with a murder accusation. The other is dealing with secrets that she's keeping, and the two women find themselves connected in interesting ways that ends up making all the difference. So I hope that you all enjoy it as much as I loved writing it.
Thank you, Kelli. Next, let's say hello to Kristina McMorris. Kristina is the author of The Girls of Good Fortune. And Kristina, you may have to, I may have to prompt you there to turn on your mic. There you go, ask to unmute.
Got it. There we go. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I had to mute it because if this stays loud over here, at some point I will take off my camera and just move inside. I thought it's so beautiful out today in the Pacific Northwest. The three of us, Susan and Kelly, know we love it outside when it's sunny and rare that way. And just right before we started, the neighbors started chopping down their tree. You can't make this up. It's always so quiet. They're sawing. Anyway, okay, we'll see how this goes. Okay, focus. New book is The Girls of Good Fortune. It's my latest historical solo novel, and in essence, it begins in Portland in 1888 when a woman awakens in an underground cell. She is drugged and disguised, has no idea how she got there or why, except she realizes she is in the so-called Shanghai tunnels under downtown Portland. And from there, her memories start floating back to her, including the path that led to her abduction. And she realizes she has left behind a child in peril. So it's going to take all of her creative, adaptive skills, especially as a half Chinese woman who is passing as white. So she is very accustomed to adapting for survival, in order to, in this case, try to get back to those she loves in time and hopefully also obviously survive. So that in an essence is the story.
Thank you, Kristina. And finally, all the way from Ireland, Hazel Gaynor is joining us, and her novel is Before Dorothy. Hazel, hello.
Hi everybody. I'm seeing lots of familiar names and also some familiar faces. So lovely to see everybody here today, and I'm thrilled to be joining Kristina, Susan, and Kelly. As a writer and as a reader, I love taking part in these panels because I also learn so much about how other writers do it, and it always gets me really excited to read their books. So I'm really looking forward to spending the next hour with everybody. So my new book coming out June 15th, so I'm in a pre-publication frenzy of excitement, is Before Dorothy, which is my imagined life story of, yes, that Dorothy's Auntie M from The Wizard of Oz. It's set during the Depression era and the Dust Bowl years of the 1930s, takes us from Ireland, of course, to Chicago, and then to Kansas. And this is my 12th novel, and I really do feel it's the book of my heart. I feel like I've been waiting most of my life to write this story, and I'm so excited for people to meet my version of Auntie M.
Thank you, Hazel. All right, well, let's go back to Susan and talk about the Wayward Girls as Kristina goes back inside.
Kristina's smooth.
That was good.
So the Wayward Girls is based on this home for I guess you would call them wayward girls. So tell us about the history behind this, the kind of tragic but real history that this novel is based on.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. This was it was one of those books that that sort of hit me all at once. It doesn't always work that way. I'm sure these other writers will tell you sometimes it's like piecing together a patchwork quilt and you're just hunting and gathering things that feed your story. And sometimes, it just kind of you stumble upon this story, and that's what happened to me. And it was actually a I don't know if you would call it a recovered memory, but it was something that I had forgotten for many, many decades. I was in the town where I grew up until I was only 10 years old, and then we moved overseas. But I was there with my older brother, and it was this small town in Western New York near Buffalo, but not in Buffalo. And it was we hadn't been there since I don't know, 1970 or whenever we moved away. And I had I guess a recovered memory. We went to the church that we had attended, the Catholic church in the town, and my brother, who was a couple years older, got to be an altar boy for about 5 minutes. And I vividly remember his raiments, the long robe and the garment that goes over it. And he was the thurifer, and that's the guy who carries the thurible, which is that it's a brass vessel full of coals and incense, and they carry it up the aisle for high mass. And so I just had I had a recovered memory, and I didn't even know if it was real. I asked John, I said, did your little cassock start on fire when you were carrying the thurible? And he said, yeah, some coals escaped and he started on fire. And for some reason, it sparked, I guess because he was on fire, it sparked a memory of, my time as a little Catholic girl. And I decided to explore the impact of the Catholic Church in the late 60s and early 70s. And it was it was huge. It was enormous. I was sort of aware of the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, which have made news internationally about these awful workplaces, and it's been in popular culture. There was that film Philomena. There was one called The Magdalene Girls or Magdalene Sisters, Small Things Like These, which is a huge, huge and beautiful novel, and a film that came out last December in the States. So I was sort of aware of those things, but I didn't realize that this system of Magdalene laundries had spread all over the world, and especially to the United States. There were at least 38 that I found, and the worst one was in Buffalo, and it was set in this big hulking, it looks like a fortress almost in what's now like central Buffalo. And that's where the bad girls were sent. And so I found a Facebook, kind of like a Facebook nostalgia group called Buffalo, about, people would post things about old Buffalo. And so I just posted a picture of the Institute because it's still there. The building is still there. It doesn't operate, obviously, as a Magdalene Laundry, thank God. But I asked just one question. I posted a picture of that building, that structure, and I said, is anybody familiar with this building at 485 Best Street? And if you go to my Instagram feed, I think it's the first video that you see on my wall or my feed. It kind of has a little overview of what it looks like. It's really kind of scary. And within like a few hours, I had 500 replies of people saying, oh my God, I know that place. My mother used to threaten me with that place. It was horrible. And so then I found survivor groups and I read court documents, and suddenly, I'm putting together this wild story. And it's one of the few books that where the title came to me and I got to keep it, because publishers are notorious for wanting to change your title, and a lot of times for very good reason. But this one was definitely Wayward Girls, because there was a little news article about it when it first opened well, no, not when it first opened, but in the 1920s, about these two wayward girls who were sent there and tried to escape, and it was very dramatic. So I started building the story from there, and it just consumed me. I loved writing it. It was hard to write, but hopefully it has, it ends the way it should.
Well, that's fascinating. It sounds like the story was always there waiting for somebody to tell it. So good for you. Let's go back to Kelli. Kelli, I have selfish interest in what you're writing about because I love to do through hikes in the US. I'm not familiar with any kind of through hiking in Scotland. So tell us about the West Highland Way and how that fits into your novel.
So let me just start by saying that through hiking in Scotland is a little different than through hiking here. It's not like the Pacific Crest Trail where you're carrying everything and not seeing civilization for weeks on end. In Scotland, you can stay in bed and breakfasts or hotels, and you can have a luggage transfer, carry your luggage. So all you have to carry is a day pack. There's some routes you can end up stopping in a pub for lunch. So it's really fabulous. But the West Highland Way is 96 miles. It goes from the Glasgow suburb of Mulgai north to the middle of the Highlands in Fort William. And most people cover it like about 7 days. And that's how I did it when I walked it in 2019 with my oldest son, who was 16 at the time. And then, and that's how my characters do it as well. And I fell in love with long hikes in Scotland on a different hike. And I knew at that point, that was back in 2017. And I knew at that point that my next one would be the West Highland Way. And I started researching the history of everything that happened along in the geographic areas where the trail runs. And I knew that my next book would be set there. I love Scottish history, and I love walking on the trails that get you away from the normal tourist areas. And it makes you feel like you're seeing the real place. And it's slow travel. So you're talking to locals and you're seeing the wildflowers and you're interacting with the Highland coos or whatever. Like, it really forces you to really slow down and really immerse yourself in the place. And so I just loved it so much. And so, but learning the history of that area, I still, like, knowing that I write dual timelines, I was like, okay, so the present day story came first. It would, as an American mom walking the West Highland Way with her son before she's going to leave him at university in Glasgow. And then she's going to fly back home to Portland, Oregon, where Kristina is, all alone. And so she's dealing with some stuff from her marriage, but I needed that historical story to go with it too. And there were, and so I thought, well, let's do the clearances. So those of you who don't know what the clearances are, it happened like in the late 1700s through the 1800s. And it is a time where a lot of great agricultural revolution was happening. A lot of cultural revolution was also happening. And there's so much complicated history here. But I'll sum it up quickly by saying that the landowners decided to get rid of all their people, all of their tenants, their clans people, and replace them with sheep farms, large-scale sheep farming. And it was a great, very traumatic for the people. And so that's what happens to my historical protagonist. And she's in 1801 in Strathglass, which is kind of northwest of Loch Ness. And so she is forced to walk to a city to find work, because this is at a time before the government was they were actively discouraging immigration because they needed people to stay to fight in their armies. It was during the Napoleonic Wars and Ireland Wars. And so anyway, so she's walking south on what is today the West Highland Way. It wasn't then, but so these two women are sharing the same land, the same geographical area, and it causes some interesting connection between them, the two of them.
Well, I think that's an excellent way to connect the dual timelines and maybe, I don't know if you catch yourself doing that yourself, like what transpired here 50, 100 years ago. And it's fun to kind of imagine that.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
In your case, it would have been 200.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Well, let's go to Kristina. Kristina, you have written a novel set in Portland about a woman who gets shanghaied. Maybe you can give us a little historical context. Tell us about your character and what happens to her.
Yeah, so the term Shanghaied, for those who don't know exactly where that comes from, I was fascinated to learn that, given that I'm in just outside Portland. So I am a local a lot of my life. I essentially a native of Oregon, and that we moved here. My parents and I moved here when I was just a few weeks old, and yet I had no idea about the history of the tunnels, the existence of them until about a dozen years ago. So that's what drew me to the story when I learned about them from a ghost hunting show, where I say all authors find our best our best ideas. And so in this case, if you're familiar with the word Shanghaied, in that slang term used for being kidnapped, but never wondered really kind of where does that come from? Why do we call it being Shanghaied? It will explain a bit more why. So when Portland was a very seedy, corrupt port town in the late 1800s, there would be captains who were shorthanded. And so one of the ways, there are many ways, known as crimping or being or Shanghaiing, what they would do in order to help fill those spots on the ships if the captain was desperate enough, then they could, I guess, saloon or a Shanghaier would drug the ale or beer of a sailor or just an able-bodied man who was, looked like he was capable. And he would wake up, they would say, as story goes, in either an underground cell in the Shanghai tunnels, or he could wake up out at sea. And at that point, he's given two choices. He can either work his way off for free all the way to a place they would say as far away as Shanghai and back, which was, by the way, a 6-year round trip, or he could refuse and risk then being tossed overboard as just a drain on resources. Because at that point, he had been sold to the captain for upwards of $50 a head, which you can imagine back then was a lot of money. So that is where Shanghai came from. Portland was known as the Shanghai capital of the world. None of this did I know until I started researching after hearing about it through a friend in the show. And so that ended up inspiring the story. So that's where I came up with my character. I knew that she was going to wake up in a cell. I didn't know exactly where it was going to go from there. And that was fun to explore. So as far as answering your other question about my character, she, as I mentioned earlier, is a half Chinese woman. She is the daughter of a Chinese immigrant. So like myself, I'm the daughter of a Japanese immigrant. My father is from Kyoto. And so her difference, of course, is that she is passing as white during an extremely anti-Chinese time, especially in the American West, which a lot of the research I did for that, which we can touch upon later, I was stunned that I'd never heard about before. And that ended up, of course, drawing me to write a story like I do with all my historical novels, when I come across a nugget of history that I think, how did I not know about this? Everybody should know about this. And that ends up pushing me to write a whole story about it that I hope people like myself might pick up because they want to enjoy a story that is wrapped around pieces of history that when you're done, just like all the other wonderful authors here too, right? That when you get done, you think, oh my gosh, I learned a lot too. And you hope then to go down the rabbit hole, that they go down the rabbit holes and learn more and then also share with other people.
Yeah, I can't imagine 6 years of just imprisonment, essentially. Wow. Well, let's go to Hazel. Hazel, you have written a novel about Aunt Em from The Wizard of Oz. We all recently went through the excitement of Wicked, also, Wizard of Oz offshoot. Um, Tell me about your inspiration here to write a story taking place prior to The Wizard of Oz and this secondary character Aunt Em.
Yeah, I think we're still all going through excitement about Wicked with the second movie coming. So it's fascinating to hear the origin of everybody's ideas. And I've always believed that ideas find the writer, and they tend to find the writer at the right time. And really the origins for Before Dorothy, Aunt Em's story, started way back in 2009. So before I was a published writer. And I'd started to write a contemporary reimagining of The Wizard of Oz set in Dublin, a play on the Emerald Isle and the Emerald City. And as a novice writer, I didn't know what I was doing. It was a terrible attempt at writing anything. And I put it aside. I wrote maybe 15 to 20,000 words. And I put it aside and started to write what became my first historical novel, The Girl Who Came Home, about the Titanic. And here we are, many years later. And when I was looking for what would be the idea for this, my 12th novel, I'd actually pitched two other historical novels to my editor, and they weren't quite landing. And for the first time, I didn't know what I was going to write next. And I went to my book shelves and I was just looking really for inspiration. The idea of a retelling, a reimagining, an origin story had always fascinated me. And I picked up a copy of Wicked by Gregory Maguire that I had read many years earlier. And I smiled to myself and I put it back and I said, well, there's the best reimagining. Who ever thought about telling the story of the Wicked Witch of the West? And I went for a walk. And no word of a lie, as I was walking, the name Auntie Em popped into my head. And I just got goosebumps because it seemed so clear, so instantly, that there was a story to be told. But I didn't know if it had already been done, and I didn't quite know what we know about NTM. I think when I say the name NTM, most people probably imagine the sepia-colored woman we meet in the movie with Judy Garland. And she's quite stern, she's quite brusque, not particularly warm or likable. So I picked up the source material, L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And in the opening chapter, he describes Auntie M as, when she first went to live in Kansas, she was a young, pretty wife, but the years had changed her. They had taken the color from her cheeks and the sparkle from her eyes, and she never smiled now. And as any writer will know, when you read something like that, that totally changes your perception of something, whether fact or fiction, it's like a piece of gold. And I instantly knew there was a gap here. There wasn't much known about her, which was my perfect way in to tell this story of a woman whose life had been changed, but by what and by whom? And one of the other things that's not definitively answered in The Wizard of Oz, either the book or the books, because Baum went on to write many more, is why is Dorothy living with her Auntie Em and Uncle Henry? Where are her parents? And are they actually connected through family or through other, is it a term of endearment? So there was this brilliant sort of gap in the archive of the canon of Oz. And so I got to work, and I really wanted to root Auntie M's story in historical setting, because that's what I write, courageous women who have overcome adversity. So setting her story through an event that may have answered why she was changed. And to me, that event was the Dust Bowl. These terrible years of drought and hardship that the prairie farmers endured. And what would it be like if this woman is struggling through that event, and at the same time, at the worst time, her young niece comes to live with her. So it was just the most magical, joyful writing experience to go back to a story I've known since I was a little girl. The Wizard of Oz was on TV every Christmas Day in England, which might sound strange to people who've known it probably as a fairy story that they grew up with as a book. For me, growing up in England, I met these characters through the movie first, and it really just has felt part of my sort of touchstone to classic children's stories, and to set a very real version of that, and to link little touchstones from a real world back to the fairy story that we know was just fantastic. And I'm having such fun talking about it. People are intrigued, and as you say, Colin, we've sort of reached this pop culture moment again of the Wicked movies. And people are going back to the origin, or sort of finding a different route back to these characters. So it's without, well, pun intended, it's wonderful to be talking about this woman who I've really fallen in love with, and I hope readers will when they meet her on the page.
Yeah, that's fantastic just to hear how a single line like that can inspire a whole another novel, and to hear how passionate you are to be able to tell that story. That's wonderful. Oh, let's go back to Susan. Susan, let's learn a little bit more about the girls in your novel. You must have had to really get to know them. It must have been kind of an emotionally charged story to lay out everything that they went through. So talk about navigating the challenges of confronting the realities that they faced, while also bringing them out as real, fully formed young women who did not deserve to be treated like that.
Yeah, thank you. And as I listen to all of us talking about our babies here, the one common thread that we all have is this incredibly detailed human element that sort of sparked us. Because when you sit down to write a novel, this book is, I think it's 130,000 words. It's 500 manuscript pages long, and that's a big commitment. And so you have to really be willing to sit not just with the story, but with the people who live in your story for a year, 2 years, however long it takes, day in and day out. And so I think our commonality as writers, and for me as a reader too, is that human story that's really emotional and really moves us to move forward with ours. And so, as I mentioned before, I did a lot of research and did discover some survivors that I talked to of this Magdalene Laundry in Buffalo called the Good Shepherd Institute. And I also, you'll be pleased, and the librarians among our listeners will be pleased to know that a key role was played by a librarian who sent me some materials that she found in archives and everything. And one of the little tidbits that she sent me was the fact that the library bookmobile used to visit this reform school once a month, and so that kind of plays a key role as well. But as I was thinking about the kind of girls who would be here, it's a lot of them would be the girls that you would imagine. They are at risk. The foster care system has failed them. The church was very aggressive in enlisting local county judges who do, family placements and things like that to send them girls to be at this institute. And so there were a lot of places feeding into it. But the first one, the first character and the main character, her name is Marin O'Hara. The first name means Star of the Sea, and the last name is named after, I kind of cribbed from actually one of the survivors in the court documents that I read. And the reason there are court documents is that New York State created that. You've probably heard about it in conjunction with like the action taken by E. Jean Carroll. It's a look back law where they removed the statute of limitations. So no matter how long ago the harm occurred, you can still take action on your own behalf. And so they had that, and they had the Adult Survivors Act in New York State. And so those elements come into play, and they enable the characters later in life to be able to seek justice for the things that happened to them. And so I decided to write an ensemble story with one lead character. So there are 6 girls. We have Marin, whose mom was a very traditional Irish immigrant, and she's sent away because it turns out Marin's stepdad is not so nice, and so the mom figured the only way to protect her is to send her to this institute when she's 15. We have Angela, who is very, very smart, but she likes girls, and that was considered a terrible, abnormal situation, and they thought the nuns would reform her. So we have Angela and Marin. We have Helen, and Helen's during the late 60s, that was when communist China under Mao Zedong was being formed, and her parents were intellectuals, and intellectuals got into a lot of trouble in China at that time, and they went to China and needed their daughter to have a place to stay. So they thought this would be, while they were in China, and they didn't know they would be detained, they thought, well, she could stay at that place down the road. The nuns will take good care of her, never knowing what it was really like on the inside. So we have her. There was actually a racial incident that was notorious in 1967, I believe, or early 68. There were race riots, and it was so severe that they actually sent the baseball player Jackie Robinson to try to calm things down. And so one of my girls who was sent to reform school, because obviously if there's a person of color to blame, that's usually the one who's going to get the blame. And so she was sent there. We have Denise, who was kind of a tough cookie, and she failed out of or I should say the family foster family system failed her. So we have her. There's a gal who's neurodivergent, and then there's a couple of the nuns who have stories of their own, and they were very interesting and fascinating to me to write about. And so it was really fun for me as a writer to try on all these roles. When we're writing about different characters, we're trying to take their point of view and and discover things about them. And so it turned into this really nicely textured, well-rounded story of girls from all walks of life who find themselves under the same roof. And I'm always a sucker for a story about a team effort, girls teaming up, and you've always got me. And so we have our team. And then what was equally fun for me was to sort of imagine how their lives would unfold after this, because obviously it was very traumatic. And when there's trauma, people recover from it in different ways and reclaim their lives in different ways. And so you get to see how each girl embraces it. And some of them really, really surprised me. I'm really proud of, the way some of them turned out. Obviously, there was some tragedy involved, but I don't want to spoil anything. But it's definitely a girls forward storyline for this book. So I'm eager to see what readers are thinking of it.
Well, it sounds like you must have really spent a lot of time getting to know them yourself in order to share their story on the page.
You do. And one of the things that happened as was finishing the book is that we drove from Bainbridge Island, where I live near Seattle, to the Texas Hill Country to go see the eclipse last year. There was a full eclipse in April of last year, and we decided to get a camper and drive down there and see the eclipse. And so during that whole time, I read the whole first draft of the novel to my husband, my very, very patient, long-suffering husband. And by the end of the trip, we were talking about these characters as if they were our kids, they were our friends. And so we still kind of talk about them like family members. Yeah.
That's great. I love your glasses, Susan. I just have to
Oh,
say.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, these are my fashion forward ones for Zoom meeting.
Kelli, let's go back to you. Your major theme in your novel is motherhood in both timelines. Talk about the scenarios for both mothers and what they want for their kids and how that plays out in your story.
So yeah, mothers and sons, that's something very dear to my heart. I have two sons myself. And so my historical protagonist, Sorika, she, as I said, she is brutally evicted from her home, and she has one son. They both must walk this route together. And so, all of her decisions are guided by how to do best for her son, for Colin. um, and oh no, sorry, Anuis is his name. Colin is my present day son. So anyway, and then in the present day, it's Kiaka. She is walking with her son. They're both American. He's going to be staying at university in Glasgow, and so the end of the hike means to her a separation. But she's also dealing with keeping secrets from her son about his dad, about her husband who has passed, but also had betrayed her in ways that she didn't want to. She doesn't want to scar his memory for her son, and so she's protecting her son. They're both moms are protecting their sons from certain truths and trying to map out their future in ways that maybe she has control over, maybe she doesn't. And just dealing with, I think, as all moms deal with, like, when their babies grow up, it hurts to let them go, but that's what they need in their own lives. But moms have to be strong at a lot of times in their lives, and so that's kind of what I deal with in this book is this love that totally makes you who you are. It gives you strength in ways you didn't know you had, and allowing yourself to feel the pain of letting them go and setting them free into their own lives. But did that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, of course.
Okay.
I think I find it interesting the parallels you can draw, even though the historical contexts are so different, but the human elements are all there and very much the same.
Yeah. Moms love their sons no matter what time you're in, and kids need to go out and forge their own paths. And there's a lot that is continual.
Well, I've got plenty more questions for our panelists. If anyone in the audience has a question that you'd like me to ask, go ahead and post that in the chat, and I'll get to that when I have some time. I'm also going to repost that landing page in the chat. If any of these books have piqued your interest, go ahead and check them out over there, and you can buy them on bookshop.org. So, Kristina, let's get back to you. I don't want, I don't want to get too political. Obviously, all of your novels have relevance for today, but as we're watching the news most recently, we have these protests in LA and threats of the National Guard coming out. And I guess the reason I'm asking is because that has to deal with immigration, and often those are people of color, and about who's welcome here and who isn't. I'm wondering if you can talk to what Celia was going through and the anti-Chinese sentiment at that time, and maybe in some ways, do you feel that relates to what we're going through today, even 140 years later?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that we all cover in our, especially historical novels, is that there are some things that change and other things that stay the same, and there are universal themes, and which is why it's so important that we learn about the past, right? They always say, so that we don't repeat the mistakes is the hope. And so it was interesting as I was writing this book, obviously long before, the topics coming into the news with, as far as, like you said, with the raids or riots or what have you, is that back then in my story, when she is struggling during a time that is very anti-Chinese, the Chinese immigrants were actually recruited from China and asked to come over because the labor was needed so badly, to build primarily the Transcontinental Railroad, just literally backbreaking labor. And then when the railroad was almost complete, then the politicians started running on slogans such as "the Chinese must go" was a big one, and they were winning on those slogans. So it is a sad point of history that is not just isolated to America, of course, in countries all over the world and throughout history, of trying to find someone to blame is sort of the easiest way to kind of deflect from a lot of things, I think, and there's struggles throughout history. So it's nice to be able, on some level, to be able to blame someone for all your problems, and that's always not accurate. So they were spreading a lot of propaganda back then too. And so, yeah, mine is absolutely not meant to be a political statement or a book, but you can't deny that in all of our books, that there are things from the past that keep popping up today, and we hope that we learn from them.
Yeah, I think that's part of the importance and value of digging these stories back up and bringing them back to the forefront, because I think this will be easily forget. We're so honed in our own perspectives, our own time, that these challenges have been here for a while.
Absolutely. And like you said, with it being 140 years later, this coincidentally is the 140th year anniversary of one of the greatest atrocities against Chinese immigrants in U.S. history that I would venture to say most people have never heard of before. So I equate it in shorthand to the Tulsa massacre against the Chinese, and that very few of us had heard about it before. When we think, why haven't we all heard about this? And the Rock Springs massacre is what happened in Wyoming. I'll just touch on it very briefly, and that is that there was a lot of tension being raised between the all immigrants really, but minors, against the white immigrant minors and the Chinese. And it finally hit a peak there, a culmination of a lot of years. And a mob of 150 armed white men, but also some children and women, also descended on Chinatown in the middle of the day and burned it to ashes. They murdered at least 28, injured at least 15, threw bodies into flames, etc. It's a horrifying incident in history. And no white person would come forward and testify, and no Chinese person was allowed legally to testify. So a grand jury could not indict, and everybody walked free. And from researching that, I ended up coming across, because of a friend of mine, I told her about this. I said, oh my gosh, did you know about this? She's one of my best friends, lives in Oregon. She is a big history buff and reader, and said, well, like, no, I hadn't heard of that, but you do know about the Hells Canyon massacre, don't you? And I said, the what? And she said, it's right here in Oregon. And so that was something just 2 years apart from the other one, that there were 7 white horse thieves, a gang of them, one as young as 15, and they surrounded between 31 and 34 Chinese immigrants who were gold dust mining down in a very remote area of Oregon, very hard to get to, which is why it was called Hell's Canyon, and then obviously later fit for a variety of really horrible reasons. And court documents from that case were hidden in a safe for over 100 years. And only in 1995 were they revealed, when the safe was donated to a county museum. Before that, it was kept separate from all the other archives, because there are a lot of prominent family members who were tied to the court case. And so that's one of those things that I come across that I think I cannot wait to share that with other readers like myself who had never heard about it before.
Yeah, that's incredible. But I'm glad you came forward with that, and maybe the Ghost Hunters will do a show on it.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Carol. Before I get to that, I want to bring Hazel back on and ask about the Dust Bowl. So you have the Wizard of Oz here, and not exactly a historical story, but Auntie M is a product of her time and what was happening there. So a big part of history here is 1930s Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. Can you tell us a little bit about what you had to do to make this an authentic story, and create a fully rounded character around that historical setting?
Yeah, great question. And from the outset, this was always to me a historical novel. It was really important to me to ground this fictional character in reality, and to set her journey, her struggles in a historical setting, so that, of course, The Wizard of Oz is a fairy story written for children 125 years ago this year, and takes us into a very fantastical, mythical world. So really, writing before Dorothy, to me, was the opposite of that. It had to feel very different and very real, and, as I say, very rooted in real world, in a real world setting. And as all my novels do, as all of our novels do, to take a moment in history and to really excavate it from the distant black and white, little fragments maybe of stories that we know about a time, a place, a person, and to bring it into a narrative setting that kind of adds color. So, and I think that's what's so fabulous about historical fiction. We're all talking about these sort of lost parts of history or little known stories. And what a historical novelist can do is make that accessible through character, through emotion, through very relatable things, that a reader today can pick up and be taken back there. And it feels real, it feels present. And to me, the way to do that for this iconic fictional world was to make it, as I say, set in a reality of the Dust Bowl, and to find examples in that real world that link back to the fantastical part of the Emerald City and Oz. So, for example, my equivalent of, I'm not writing a wicked witch in this story, but I needed a malevolent force. I needed something that terrified everybody, that threatened everybody. And that to me was the dust storms. So these dark, menacing, destructive forces that, change everything for the prairie farmers. That is my equivalent of the Wicked Witch. Taking other elements from the story, the iconic gingham dress that Dorothy wears, for example, where would be a real world example of that? And at the time, the women of the prairies were extremely resourceful, and they started to make clothing for their children from the grain sacks and feed sacks. And the producers of the grain and the feed started to realize people were using their sacks to make clothing. So what did they do? They printed patterns on the sacks so that the dresses would look more like a dress. And one of the patterns that became most popular was a blue and white gingham check. So the gingham girl dresses, and again, it's a very real setting that to me gives us a reason for Dorothy wearing the dress that she does. So everything that happens in Before Dorothy is born of the history of that time and of that place. And that was really important to me to, as I say, sort of take things that we know from the Wizard of Oz and thread in these links, little Easter eggs, if you like, for readers who've loved the Wizard of Oz as much as me to find. But if you come to Before Dorothy never having heard of the Wizard of Oz, it works as a historical novel, and it, as I say, takes a part of history. To me, the answer to that line I said earlier about bounds, everything had changed for Emily, was Kansas and the Dust Bowl. But I take her story from being from a family of Irish immigrants, so similarly to Susan's setting, and therefore talking about the reality of home. What is home? Where is home? What happens when home changes geographically, drastically, environmentally? So it was really, as I say, just really important to take everything we know about this world, but find a real historical reason for that ultimate story that we know from the Wizard of Oz. So my research was fascinating, took me to a lot of, as I think we all have, you know, and I think that's part of the joy of a historical novelist, is to learn something as well as write something, and to dig deeper into the Dust Bowl, you know, to look at Depression era Chicago, to take part of an Irish immigrant family from Connemara in the west of Ireland, and where may they have gone in America, was really fascinating to me as well. So, you know, as we all have huge amounts of research books, and a lot of the research stays out, only what works for the story is on the page that readers will find. And hopefully the history is sort of hidden almost within the narrative and the characters, and you forget that you're reading something set in the past. So yeah, I hope people will enjoy Before Dorothy, whether they come to it from a historical reader point of view or from you know, looking for the little Easter eggs. There are plenty. Happy hunting from that story that we all know. And Kelly, thank you. Can I just shout out the bookmark?
So cute.
That was a gift from a very dear friend of mine. So yeah, she sits in there happily.
I found that on Etsy. I bought one of those for someone. Yeah, I think must have been because of Wicked, and somebody's been making those kind of bookmarks. Yeah, they're really cute.
Yeah, I'm falling down a never-ending rabbit hole of merch, so I have to stop.
Well, we've got a few questions. We don't have much time. I did get a question from our YouTube audience. This is from Peg. She runs the history shelf, and she just wants to know, how long does it take each of you to go from an idea to actually finishing your novel? I know Hazel had said you had this idea in 2008 or something like that. So maybe if each one of you could just give us real quickly, how long did it take you from your inspiration to actually finishing your stories?
I think that, I'm pretty consistent. I've written dozens and dozens of books. And so from my initial idea, and I guess it depends, are we talking about the idea that I have, or the idea that I talked my publisher into accepting from me? Because like others have mentioned on this panel, sometimes we pitch different ideas. Oh, I could write this, or I could write that. And once we've nailed down that idea, for me, it's about a year, and I'm pretty fast. So for me, it's a year. But there are ideas like Hazel mentioned that we've been carrying around forever. You know, they kind of circle over our heads like the air traffic over O'Hare Airport, you know, which one gets to come in for a landing. And so sometimes we'll be working on something that was sparked by an idea from decades ago, and sometimes it's, you know, just a fresh idea. But the actual hands-on brainstorming, plotting, writing process for me takes between 1 and 2 years.
And I'm about double that. So I'm a really slow writer, and I like to take my time with the research and letting the story find me. So yeah, Smoke on the Wind took me about 4 years, 5 years if you count all of the revising stages. But
Yeah. And with me, so often before it was that an idea hit me and I'd research for about 4 or 5 months, come up with the outline, and then dive in and write the book for about 9 months. So I say it's like having a baby, and at the end you hope that people don't call your baby ugly. But what happened the last two book ideas I've had for my solo novels, they were ideas that I had gathered, this one a dozen at least years ago, and thought, oh, this would make a great setting for a book then, but I didn't know what that story was. And so just putting that, it was always simmering. And my next book idea that I'm really hoping my publisher is going to love, that I'm about to turn in as an idea, is something, same thing that I've had for probably at least 10 years. And I joke that these last two ideas that I'm working on has always been like the eye doctor, where it's like 1 or 2, 2 or 3. And somehow it keeps being the one that's left behind until I'm like, okay, that's the one. Finally, I know what the story is now. I knew it was tunnels, the Shanghai tunnels being, just fascinating under downtown Portland, and their history, but not knowing what it is past that, besides a really cool fun fact and setting. And so those ones have taken me longer, but when I finally figure out when something clicks and put two things together that I had thought about before, for me, that's usually when I have a movie in my head that plays out almost from beginning to end, and then I know I can write the story.
And for me, 2009 is extreme, but this idea patiently waited for me while I wrote 11 other novels. So I think we've all got that, there is a perfect analogy, Susan, these ideas circling above us. It's just which ones we choose to listen to. And if we ignore them, they'll drift away to another author, and then we'll go, damn it, that was my idea. But when I get down to the writing, like I sent an email to my agent, very excited, saying, I want to write Auntie-M story, Auntie-M from The Wizard of Oz. It's the best or worst idea I've ever had. That was September 2022, and the book will be published next week, June 25th, 2025. So I'm kind of between Susan and Kelli, probably. I'm not the fastest writer, and I don't plot my books, so I do tend to write myself into lots of sticky situations that I then have to unpick. And every time I tell myself I'm not going to do that again, and every time I do, but it all gets done in the end. So yeah, probably about two and a bit years, beginning to end.
Well, congratulations to all of you. I want to wrap things up here. We're up against the end of the hour. We could talk forever. We barely scratched the surface here. I would like to let our audience know that Hazel and Kristina will be on a panel at the Historical Novel Society conference in Las Vegas. So if anybody wants to take a weekend in Las Vegas, come meet us in person. I'll be there as well. But thanks to everyone for attending. Thank you to our panelists, and just congratulations on these wonderful stories and sharing these wonderful histories. Before we end here, I always ask the question is like, why historical fiction? Now, a lot of you have kind of covered that already, but I came at historical fiction as a historian, is where I started out. But there's just so much more power in storytelling, and what I love about historical novels is you have to go so far in depth into the history beyond just what you can read, beyond just interviews and documents and those sorts of things. You have to really get to know these people. So I wonder if each one of you could just go talk very briefly about why write this as a story rather than as a history. What's the value of historical fiction? Susan, could you start us off?
I think one of the people who endorsed Wayward Girls was Jodi Picoult. Everybody knows who she is, but part of the review that she wrote, or the blurb that she wrote, is she said, it said, this isn't just a moment in time, it's a cautionary tale. And so I think I love to explore the way something, that happened back then, a historical event, reflects back on today's world. And so I think it's a bit of a mirror. It helps us see today more clearly if we explore the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Kelly, how about you?
I feel like fiction helps. What's that saying? Truth is truth is stranger than fiction. No, it's a story told in fiction is sometimes so much more approachable and believable than if you were told the true story of what actually happened. So I feel like more readers approach history through fiction and can take it in by walking in the footsteps of a character, and that just makes it more alive because you also get the details, the clothing, the food, the just all of the interesting details from that history that really bring it to life. And that's why I prefer history and fiction rather than just straight history.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Kelly.
I add on to that same, as far as I think we all love fiction, especially because I think more than almost any genre, I think it increases empathy in people, and that you be in their heads, you hear their thoughts, and we also have the ability as fiction authors to take small liberties here and there that serve the purpose. We love our author's note to tell you the difference, but to be able to cover more than a couple different incidents, for example, that are important to history, rather than maybe just having to focus on one because of a timeline. We're able to jump a lot and have other characters that also explore and have their experiences. And the thing that I love most about historical fiction, which is why I keep sticking with it, is that I remember just as a reader being absolutely immersed more than any other time period, or any other, I say, like modern day story in historical fiction, is when I read A Water for Elephants. I remember thinking I was just so fascinated by a completely different time period, and a world, the circus in the 30s, that I would never even thought I'd be interested in, and yet I found it fascinating. And so that is something that I love to do as a writer, because I love doing that as a reader.
Thanks, Kristina.
I totally agree. I mean, you've said it all, but the fact is often stranger than fiction. And I think what historical fiction can do is take those dramatic, life-changing moments from history, which is the essence of a great story, ultimately, isn't it? The what would you do? And to be able to look back at an event and not be inhibited almost by the factual history, but to add additional character, to add dialogue to a character who we've never heard speak, to add, as I say, colour to very static black and white images of an event that then can come alive. And it definitely gives us empathy. I think when we colorize something in our minds, it makes us relate more to that period and those people, and that's hugely important, particularly when we see what's happening with the world right now. So historical fiction is the best genre, and that's the end.
Yay! Thank you, people.
Well, thanks again to everyone. I really had a good time, and definitely go out and check out these books. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
Thanks for
Thank you.
having us.
Thank you,
Yeah, thank you
everybody.
again, Colin. Come see us online.
I know.
Happy reading.